Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with Scott Orn about remote work and how organizations are dealing with it and learning to thrive during COVID. Scott Orn, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have the chance to chat about remote work and this current COVID situation and how organizations are dealing with all of this and how employees are dealing with all of this. I think it'll be a great topic for discussion today. And it was fun chatting with you in the pre-interview, just getting to know a little bit more about you and understanding a little bit more about your background. As we get started, I want to share Scott's bio with the listeners. Scott Orn runs and operations at Cruise Consulting, a fast-growing startup CFO consulting firm that works with over 250 startup clients. Cruise is based in San Francisco with clients in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and New York. In addition to his operations responsibilities, Scott runs the venture debt consulting practice at Cruise. In his spare time, he publishes the Founders and Friends podcast, which interviews startup CEOs, investors, and other service providers in the startup ecosystem. I could really go on and on about Scott and his background. He has tremendous educational background and lots of great professional background at various organizations. I'll let Scott perhaps share a little bit more about that himself. But Scott, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thanks, John. My mom's gonna love that. Like, you did that so well. My background. She's gonna be very proud of me. Just listening to the podcast. Yeah, the quick background. You nailed it. I work at Cruise. We've grown really a ton. My wife started a company 8 years ago. I joined 5 years ago. I was the third person, and now we're 65 people, and we're remote, which is really is something we're gonna talk about in the conversation. And we did that 2 years ago, and it really kind of opened up the business for us and allowed us to hire better people, frankly. And before that, I worked in venture capital for 9 years. So I've invested in a lot of startups. I did like Angie's List and Upwork and Impossible Foods, FreshBooks, tons of companies. But I wanted to live that entrepreneurial life, and so that's when I joined Vanessa. So, and then I'm super fortunate. I have a beautiful. I'm actually married to Vanessa, our founder, at work, and she's my wife. We started working together before we were married, and then we have a very, very beautiful 2.5-year-old daughter. So we got a lot going on. We got the company and a little baby.
Congratulations! That's awesome.
Thanks.
You know, kids are amazing. They're a handful and take a lot of time and cause you to lose a lot of sleep. I have 6 children, but mine are
Good for you.
Mine are a little bit older. My oldest is 16. My youngest is 7. 7. So, you know, we've gone through the baby and toddler stage with all of them, and man, I feel for you because I know it can be challenging, but it's a blessing, and it's a wonderful time.
Yeah, I was just congratulating my daughter this morning that she had slept through the night 2 nights in a row in her own bed, and she was like beaming, and all I could think about was like, please keep the streak going over the weekend. Come on, kid. Let's do this.
I can relate so well.
Yeah. Well, if you have 6, that means like pretty much if one kid has an issue every day, 1 day a week, you got an issue every day. So that's I'm sure keeping you very busy.
Yeah, it's fun. Well, and it relates to what we're talking about today too. Amidst COVID, one of the challenges that organizations have been facing, they have to figure out who needs to be in person at the workplace, who may be customer facing, where we need people physically there, who can work remotely, what's that balance look like. But then people working at home, I work from home, my wife works from home, we have 6 kids, we're trying to help them do their, not now over the summer, but during the school year, we're trying to help them do school. And man, it's hectic. It's a challenge. And so employees are dealing with all of that while also just dealing with the broader stresses and anxieties around the pandemic and the social isolation that comes with it. But also, we have the political environment in an election year with heightened tensions, and we have heightened tensions around systemic inequalities and race and LGBTQ plus issues, and all the stuff that's piling on. That's the context in which people are now kind of working from home, and employers trying to figure out how do we engage our employees remotely, how do we help them with their mental health and their need for connection, how do we help them be productive and continue to innovate in the space where companies are struggling to stay afloat. It's quite the fun environment.
It's crazy. Well, I know we have a lot of data on startups we work with. And we were in the Wall Street Journal, I think on Monday or Tuesday, we're taping this in late July, where we actually saw 50% of our clients eliminate their WeWork subscriptions, like their office subscriptions. And so, there's kind of no going back right now. Like we don't really have a lot of choice. And so the companies that I see doing the best in this environment are the ones that are embracing it and actually building the infrastructure, the tools, the communication, the processes, like the weekly one-on-ones, the weekly group meetings, the all hands meeting every week. All that infrastructure is what allows you to run a company remotely. And so the companies that we see that are struggling are the ones that are kind of trying to do this how they used to always do it, but they don't have that crutch of like running into each other in the hallway or popping into a conference room or things like that. So my overall arching advice for a lot of these companies is build those processes. Zoom, Slack, those are like your 2 best friends, in communicating remotely with your team. And then there's a ton of like fun stuff that you can do. Like I know for us that one of the most popular Slack channels we have in the whole company is called Top Chefs. And it's people posting pictures of the amazing food they cook at home. And like everyone loves it. And it's one of those things that it becomes kind of a magnet for Slack. So it draws people in and they're used to communicating. We also have a diversity channel where people post about, different ethnic groups or different holidays coming up or things like that. And we did that before like the Black Lives Matter movement started. It was just kind of one of our team members, Janika, started that channel. But those are some of the things that become kind of the connective tissue of the company, because we can all kind of see the same stuff and talk about it, and we're doing it in a structured environment. But I really do, I'm in some like COO coaching groups and things like that, in some online groups, and I see that I just really encourage people to spend the time to build that infrastructure to make communication more of a habit and make it easier. That's how we're all going to get through the COVID stuff in the workplace.
That's great advice, great tips, and I love the focus on still providing remote, virtual ways for people to have that connection, whether it be through Zoom, virtual happy hour, having team meetings on a regular basis, doing check-ins with each other, seeing how everyone's doing, the Slack channels, all great advice. So I'm curious what you have found in your company specifically in terms of the challenges that have arisen because of the remote work. We were just talking about some things you can try to do to create that connection. And I do believe most people want to be effective in their jobs, and most people, even when they're working remotely, they're going to do their work. They're going to get things done. But things don't always go smoothly, and sometimes there's a need for course correction. So what are some of those things you found over the last 4 months?
Yeah, I think, and we went remote 2.5 years ago. I vividly remember the moment when we decided to do it. We were actually on vacation, And Vanessa and I are sitting there on like the steps of our little apartment. And we had a good problem in that our company was growing super fast. And there was a lot of demand for our services, but we could just not hire like the top tier people in San Francisco, LA, and New York. It just was like too expensive. The big companies like Google and Apple, and they were poaching people. Even if we got someone who was really strong, they would leave in 9 months. So it was just like this real dilemma because we just had like a fundamental problem in the business. And I remember Vanessa saying like, we had tried to do remote about 4 years earlier. It didn't work. And it was because we didn't have a lot of processes like scheduling. We didn't have grading of work. We didn't have process check-ins. We didn't have a good project management software. And so, but she reflected in that moment and said, you know, I think we built enough process to be able to hold people accountable if they're not doing their job, and reward people and recognize people who are doing a great job in that environment. And so we did it. We pulled the trigger. And I remember like going back into our hotel room and putting a bunch of job postings up like that minute because we needed people that badly. And so one of the big challenges we saw early on was, and this is going to happen to people right now in COVID because COVID came so quickly. It's really hard to have, when people go back into office, having a physical group, like a presence physically together, and then having like half the company remote is actually really difficult for the people who are remote because they are missing out on some of those hallway conversations and popping into the conference rooms and things like that. So my advice to people is, even if you're going to have physical offices when COVID is over, is to build those processes and build those tools so that everyone is on the equal playing field and there's no kind of perception of favorites. Because even if you're not favoring people who are physically there, the people who are remotely don't always know that. And so it's just kind of difficult for them. So being fully remote is actually the way to go, in my opinion. The other challenges we saw were actually scripting out workflows became very important with like weekly deadlines. When before, what we found was people, and part of this is like the people we hired previously 4 or 5 years ago were maybe not as mature and didn't understand what it took to work remotely. And the whole movement was a lot earlier in its movement. But now we have very prescriptive deadlines, and those deadlines, if you don't hit them, they affect your teammates. And so there's this like positive incentive system for people to reach out and check on, you know, hey, how's that coming along? Is that almost done? Because, you know, I need to get my workout by Thursday or Friday. And so having it all in a good project management system, we use something called Maven Link, is very, very helpful because it makes it all transparent. And so at any moment, anyone in the company can see where the work is and what needs to happen, and they can see where the bottlenecks are. So project management software can actually make the whole process transparent and help you get rid of the bottlenecks. So having a remote first culture, using all the tools, and then having a good project management software or tool set are probably the 3 most important things. And if I was to add one more, I would say build a really nice recognition system. So we have 7 core values at our firm, and every week on the Monday morning meeting, we call it core values in action, and we call out people who've done a really amazing job. And then at the end of the presentation, we have another section where we just call it quick shout outs for people who did a great job on something. And then finally, we have a tool called Bonusly, which I really like. It sits inside of Slack and allows you to give like micro bonuses to people, and it makes an announcement to the whole company in Slack, like, hey, John did a great job recording the podcast today. He gets 20 Bonusly points. And it sounds like not a lot, but they add up, and we have people cashing out like $1,000 Amazon gift certificates and things like that. And it's not the monetary aspect of it, it's the recognition aspect of it. So if you can do those 4 things, you're most of the way there. Now it's always easier to say this stuff, but actually executing on it just takes time. And that's kind of why I say like get going now, don't wait, because the longer you wait, it just takes longer to get in the flow.
Great practical tips. I love all of that. And, it was interesting how you were talking about the difference between a completely remote company versus the balance and the tightrope you have to walk if you have some remote workers and some people in the office. Because there's something about that intangible, like when you're there physically, there's just organic things that arise. You bump into people in the elevator, or the kind of cliche water cooler moments, or you interact with people in informal ways that can lead to collaborations and new
Yep.
projects and new assignments, and all sorts of things that could be seen or perceived as giving people in the physical workspace greater opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily the case, but you have to be careful of that. And so a lot of the ideas that you've had about how to create that connection and how to make sure that people still feel like they have those same types of opportunities even in a remote environment, I mean, that's really, really important. Because
Yeah.
I suspect most companies, there will be some companies that come out of COVID that were traditionally brick and mortar physical workspaces that are just going to move completely remotely because they've figured out, hey, this actually works quite well. We're going to save a lot of money, in terms of overhead costs. So we're going to do this. But I think most companies will probably just go back to some sort of a mix. They'll realize that, yeah, we can do remote work, but we don't want everyone doing remote. Or maybe they'll have like, you can work remote a couple days a week and the rest of the time you're in the workplace. I think there's going to be a lot of those hybrid approaches that start to emerge when we come out of COVID. So it'll be super interesting to see how that takes place.
Yeah.
But companies need to be really thoughtful, like you talked about. They need to be really thoughtful and careful about how they do that so that everyone has equal opportunity. And it could potentially lead to a lot of problems in terms of morale, in terms of fairness and equity, all those sorts of issues.
Yeah. One of the ways I think you touched upon it, like that magic that happens when people are together. And so we do once a year, at least, an all hands get together. And so everyone in the company came to Las Vegas last year just because it was a central place. We were very aggressive about encouraging not getting out of control in Vegas because we didn't want people doing anything they regret. But we had a 3-day offsite where we got to sit in like a big conference room together and have presentations. Everyone in the company made presentations. We had some guest speakers. We did dinner every night, and I'm on the older side, so the younger people went out and had fun in Vegas, and that was bonding for them too. But I do think there's a magic in getting together at least once. And I know this year we were going to try to do it twice, but COVID hit. So I do think you can kind of capture some of that. And some of those, like, we're human beings, we're social creatures. We do like to be around other people. So it does help to get together. And, it is kind of expensive to do that, but we just looked at it as an investment and said, you know what, like this is one of the highest ROI things we can invest in our people and getting them together and building that connective tissue. So we pulled the trigger, and I loved it. It was really fun, and we got so much good feedback. So if you're remote, and obviously it's hard to get together in a place like Las Vegas or Arizona or somewhere like that now. But if you do go remote, I really recommend you do that once a year at least.
Yeah, I think so too. And I've been completely remote. I'm a professor full time. I do consulting stuff on the side. I've been to campus. I live a mile from campus, but I've been to campus maybe twice for a grand total of 45 minutes in the last 4 months.
Yeah.
So I'm completely remote, and then all the consulting work is done completely remotely.
Yeah.
And our team, does our get-togethers and stuff. I was in a retreat. This was for some of the university work that I do. I was in, what we would normally do is like a physical retreat. We go out and we do the brainstorming, we do this strategic planning and all that kind of stuff. But, we instead, they wanted to do it all on Microsoft Teams. And I've been in a couple of these over the last several weeks. The first one I was in, they actually scheduled like an 8-hour Microsoft Teams virtual meeting.
Oh, wow. That's rough.
That was brutal. And I would not advise that. And so when I was with another group and we were planning out, like, we need to do this, we don't want to do this in person. How are we going to do it? And so we just decided to break it up and have smaller meetings throughout the week, and that worked much better. But it still doesn't have the same feel, or the same energy, when you're with each other in person and doing the brainstorming and stuff. And so having those opportunities to meet physically, with appropriate precautions, for social distancing and whatever, to make sure people are healthy and safe. But having that opportunity is something that you definitely want to invest in, because it will pay dividends, like you mentioned. So whether that's a once a year offsite, fun engagement opportunity, or it's physical retreats for strategic planning, or whatever it might be, I don't know. Finding those opportunities on a regular basis, I think, will be valuable.
I totally agree. And to your point about those long Zoom or Microsoft team meetings, like I just don't think the human brain and eyes can stare at a screen that long and pay attention. And I'm in some coaching groups, and we've had to, we used to do like an 8-hour day getting together, and you can't do that. It just, your attention span, the fatigue, and you're not really accomplishing anything. So I'd shoot for a much shorter, like a 2-hour segment instead of an 8-hour segment, but just know you're going to get, it's going to be a nice return on the invested time there, instead of trying to go like the whole day. Sounds good when you're planning it, but it's not good when you're actually experiencing it through video screens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Scott, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today. I wish we had more time, but we're about out of time. Before we part ways, I do want to give you a chance to share more about your work, your podcast, how people can get connected with you and learn more about what you're doing.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Well, thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just reach out to us, Cruze Consulting, Kruze Consulting. We always say Cruze with a K. And we put a lot of resources, like free resources, on our website for startups. So you can get free financial models, know the best software applications to use if you're starting a business. And we're always there to answer questions if you need it. And then, just check out my podcast, Founders and Friends. I interview startup CEOs and VCs and folks like that. So it's exactly this format. Like, you do a really good job of having a very conversational and friendly format. And I try to do the same thing on my podcast. And I just really appreciate your time, John.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really encourage listeners to reach out to Scott, check out his podcast, find out more about what he's doing with his work, and see if there's a way that you can get connected and work with Scott. It's been a real pleasure having the conversation today. I hope everyone will be able to find success in their remote work or in-person physical work, however it may play out. Stay healthy and safe, and have a wonderful week.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe, and that you have a great week.